Hi, and welcome to season 4. It's amazing to be back, and thank you so much to you all listeners for all the feedback and really fueling another season of amazing science-based content around gut health and overall health. I'm your host, Ariadna Masó, and today, the very first episode of season 4 is with a very special guest. Let me introduce you to Sandra Mikhail, an internationally known accredited practicing dietitian, author and founder and director of Nutrition A to Z. Sandra holds a Bachelor of Nutrition and Dietetics by Monash University in Australia and a Master of Advanced Studies in Nutrition and Health by ETHZ. And she's a member of Dietitians Australia as well, holding a sports nutrition diploma by the International Olympic Committee. Sandra is also the author of the Gut Chronicles book, and she also hosts a podcast called The Gastroenterologist and His Daughter, where I had the pleasure to be part of recently on an episode. Well, Sandra, it's such an honor to have you on the show. Welcome.
Hey, that's my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me. The roles are reversed now.
Absolutely. So for our audience to know, Sandra kindly invited me to her podcast, which, by the way, is a must listen.
You should ask all the questions this time.
Amazing. I can't wait. And also some of the questions, obviously, we're going to talk about the female gut and evidence-based holistic approach with key pillars of gut health. I loved your book, by the way. The Gut Chronicles is definitely super insightful, very practical. And yeah, let's go then. Let's get started.
Let's get into it.
So, Sandra, first of all, it would be amazing to know a little bit about your story. What was the driver? What inspired you to become a dietitian specialized in gut health?
Gosh, look, where do I start? I mean, as you know now, so I am the daughter of a gastroenterologist. So many people would say I was born into it. I had no choice, but way before gut health became trendy. It was, look, growing up, it was totally normal to talk about, the gut, hearing things like rectal bleeding and anal fissures, like all the poo talk was completely normal during our dinner table talks. I was very familiar with all these terms at a very young age. And in terms of my career, I decided to actually get into nutrition and dietetics purely because I was very fascinated by, I mean, at some point, do I become a doctor? Do I study medicine? Or this whole concept of dietetics, nutrition dietetics was actually coming on to was becoming more popular. Well, back in Australia, not in different places in the world. And I just loved how it created that bridge, especially when it came to medical nutrition therapy. So off I went, became a clinical dietitian, eventually specializing in gastroenterology, sports nutrition, and eating disorders as well. And I've worked in places like Australia, Dubai, the UAE, and now I've been in Switzerland with my own private practice and business for the last 12 years now. So it's been a long time. So, I would say I'm practical, well, not yet Swiss, but practically Swiss as well. So yeah, I would say also, that's kind of my career in a nutshell, being exposed to gut health at a very, very young age, but also at the age of 25, I had my first burnout. And I was diagnosed with IBS. So that's irritable bowel syndrome for those that are unaware. And interestingly enough, I was already a dietitian before being diagnosed with IBS. And it was one of the roughest periods of my life. That 1 year was absolute hell. Again, I don't need to explain what it's like, when you're experiencing all these gut symptoms and you're going from tests left, right, and center, you're running to the loo 10 to 12 times a day. So it was quite debilitating. But because I was already a dietitian then, it even kind of fueled that fire more to specialize in gut health. So here I am. I've been a gut health specialist now for many, many years with a private practice. We're based in Switzerland, but also consult everywhere. And that kind of feeds into the book. So, a lot of people ask about why the Gut Chronicles, why this book in specific. It's been 5-6 years in the making, but I would say for me, there are multiple reasons. One is just helping people navigate the amount of misinformation and pseudoscience that is out there because it is not regulated. You know that. You see that on social media. I mean, it's not only in gut health, it's just everything right now. Everyone and their mother and their neighbor are a dietitian or a nutritionist, and they have their own opinion of what's right or wrong. So that would be one thing. And the other part of it is wanting to break the taboo around poo and just normalize talking or vocalizing topics that people will secretly Google, you know what I mean? Or even use now Chat GPT or AI to say, hey, how can I deal with my hemorrhoids? Or what is that lump? You know, is that a prolapsed hemorrhoid? Why am I bleeding? So these, I would say, would be the main drivers for why I wanted to write the book.
It's amazing, out of the personal experiences. And obviously, I also admire that you have been in so many countries and you have like an incredible, overview as well, because that actually plays a role as well. But and by the way, for our audience right now, Sandra is wearing these amazing earrings that are actually like shaped like a gut, like a all the
Like the
intestine.
intestines that we had. No, I mean,
Intestine,
again,
yeah.
it was like total fluke.
I love it. We should we'll post a picture and some videos
Absolutely.
where definitely about, poo talk, all the stories that you mentioned in your book, right? Are very relatable. And basically something that really I found really enjoyable is to connect, to have all these gut connections that you mentioned in the book, right? I mean, we hear talking a lot about gut brain axis and especially, connected with functional disorders like
Yeah.
irritable bowel syndrome, but you go beyond that, right? You mention about the skin gut connection, the lung gut connection, and many more. Can you explain to us like the importance of gut and these connections?
Look, again, I potentially am biased to say, gut health is central to everything. But when we think about gut health, it's not just about poo. So, not only are we looking at digestion and absorbing nutrients and eliminating waste, but we're also talking about immunity. So we do know that about 70 to 80% of our immune system lies within our gut. And this is, that the brilliance of our gut microbiomes, that's an inner ecosystem. And they communicate with our immune cells how to respond to infections. So, we can call our gut microbes like our guardians of our inner galaxy. So that's one way that we look at it, gut health, immunity. And then you just mentioned the gut brain axis. So we look at brain function. I think when we're looking at these connections, I would say we're only scratching the surface. So the gut brain axis, it's such a fascinating field. And for those who are unaware, this gut brain axis is basically this bi-directional communication pathway between your brain and your gut. Think of them as having, a call-free package. They're chit-chatting away all the time. They're constantly communicating, checking in on how everyone else is doing. And then apart from these connections, we're starting to see, COVID, we've lived through a life-changing event. And this is where we're also starting to look at research. Hold on, is there a gut lung connection and a gut skin connection? So we are looking at the diversity of our inner ecosystem. Are there potentially certain gut microbes that influence skin health? Can we manipulate skin health by, for example, probiotics? Again, early stages, there's a lot out there. So, and maybe a connection that I'm also starting to get quite interested in is this whole gut hormone connection. So there's a lot for us to say. I'm going to say there's enough evidence to let us to say that, yes, gut health is absolutely central to everything. But keeping that in mind, we're not just we're not separate compartments. We are one whole functioning unit. So if you want to eat for gut health, you're also eating for brain health, you're also eating for heart health, you're also eating for hormone health. And this is one thing that I keep reminding people as well. And as my dad always says, even as a gastroenterologist, there are certain instances as a health professional, medical professional, sometimes you need to think beyond your specialty. So this is where I would say, yes, it is central to everything, but we're just one whole functioning unit and not separate compartments at the end of the day.
Yeah, this 360 approach is definitely very needed, and
Absolutely.
something, yeah, that we're still missing, right? There's so many gaps out there in terms of actual pathways looking holistically, but yet with evidence. You mentioned something I loved, the microbes, this microbiome, right? The little guardians of our inner galaxy. I will use that as a quote probably. But Sandra, you also mentioned the gut hormone axis and connection. And I would love now to deep dive into the female gut, right? I mean,
Yep.
as women in our lives, we go through different stages, right?
Absolutely.
Pregnancy, perimenopause, menopause. Yeah, can you walk us through how gut looks like for female?
So I think one of the interesting things that potentially can be a nudge, well, let me kind of backtrack. We're under researched, right? There's really not, I mean, you would know that as well, especially when you're working in women's health, not just gut related, but there's not a lot of research out there to show us, how different are we to our male counterparts when it comes to our response to medication. We talk about prevalence of certain gut conditions, autoimmune disorders. So I always kind of remind people a lot of the times that we are not smaller men. We are a whole different kind of complicated, beautifully complex world of hormones, I would say, right? Hormones are the main drivers. So your sex hormones are the main drivers when it comes to these differences. So for example, if we had to look at the female gut in relation to potentially why do women experience more gut disorders than men, it's a combination of different things. So there is enough evidence to show that, okay, women experience, so the prevalence of IBS is more prevalent in women than in men. And in terms of the subtypes of irritable bowel syndrome, women tend to be more constipation predominant, but we also see more diarrhea predominance in men. Why is that? Hormones, as I mentioned, anatomy, and also there's a lot of different psychosocial factors that come into play. So maybe a little bit of kind of basic biology for those who are not familiar, but what we know is that your main driving sex hormones like estrogen and progesterone, they do influence gut motility and gut sensitivity, often leading to symptoms like irregular bowel movements, bloating, and pain. Now, if we have to kind of go one layer deep into it, the way these hormones impact your gut is that they have these receptors, or call them docking points along your intestinal lining. So, and fluctuating levels of these hormones, once they kind of attach to these docking points, they impact how fast or how slow food is going to move through your digestive tract. So, and it also, I mean, these fluctuations can also influence how much fluid is being absorbed from your gut. As a result, depending on what your hormones are doing, potentially you might experience diarrhea. Potentially you might, bloated. You might be more constipated. You become a bit more sensitive to pain. So I think we also, apart from hormones being, the main driver here, do women's guts potentially we react differently to things like stress and diet as well? Do women, are we more vocal in terms of seeking medical help than men for our symptoms? I can't be conclusive here. You know what I mean? Like, you can't say, are women more stressed than men? But maybe we're more vocal and we're more open to seeking help when it comes to these conditions as well. So I would say if we had to look at it from a gut disorder perspective, these tend to be the main factors that contribute to that higher prevalence of gut disorders in women. If we had to look at this gut hormone connection in a bit more detail and then vice versa, maybe I'll turn the tables around for a second. Let me ask you, if you're willing to share, if you do have a regular cycle, right? Have you ever noticed how your cycle impacts your gut at all?
Oh, 100%. Oh yeah, actually, on your book, right? When you talk about, the period poo and all
Yeah.
that, how that impacts, gut health. Absolutely. 100% relatable to that.
So this tends to be one of the biggest examples of this connection, right? If we had to look at how hormones play a massive role when it comes to gut health throughout a woman's life, the menstrual cycle is one, pregnancy is another, just like you mentioned, postmenopause and menopause, even perimenopause leading up to the menopause. So if we had to look at your menstrual cycle for a second, now, again, obviously, you know, the average cycle is 28 days. Not everyone has that. This is being very, very general because there's a lot of factors that can impact that, whether you're on birth control or not, whether you're going through fertility treatments or not. So let's just go kind of keep it very basic, but I'm going to use ovulation as an example. So ovulation generally occurs around the middle of your cycle. So let's say day 14. Generally what happens there, you get a surge of estrogen. So it peaks before ovulation, promoting the release of an egg from your ovary. And then during that time, progesterone starts to rise. Now, some women might complain that, hey, I really feel my ovulation. I get stomach pain. I'm extremely bloated as well. So that surge of estrogen before ovulation can lead to increased gut motility or even more frequent bowel movements. Some women complain of bloating, water retention. So this is, again, all due to hormonal fluctuations. Now, if you go to that second part of your cycle, the luteal phase, a lot of women find it the most turbulent phase of your cycle. So that let's take PMS, for example, like the week leading up to your menstruation. During that time, so let's say a week before your period or so, this is again giving average numbers, progesterone levels start to rise. And we do know that progesterone has a relaxing effect on smooth muscles. Basically, it means that your gut can become very sluggish. This is why a lot of women complain of constipation right before their periods. And also the other thing, potentially not a very common symptom, but because of this relaxing, you know, the relaxing effect progesterone has, some women can complain of heartburn and reflux. Why? So if you look at anatomy, you've got your food pipe, you've got your stomach, and then you've got this lower esophageal sphincter, we call it, that junction that opens and closes. Now, if it's, you know, progesterone is a relaxant, that can relax, causing stomach acid to kind of go up to your food pipe, causing these uncomfortable symptoms. So this is kind of like an example. I mean, it's a clear-cut example of how hormones impact our gut. We see that when you get your period. So when, you know, the first 2 days, women go from constipation, whoop, I've got diarrhea, loose stool. So I think in a way, this just gives us an indication, even as a dietitian, is like, hold on, there's a lot that we can do from a lifestyle, like a nutrition and diet and lifestyle perspective to address these symptoms. So kind of this is a quick rundown or a few examples of our menstrual cycle. But the same thing applies in pregnancy. I mean, pregnancy, we do see the impact of progesterone. Again, constipation can be quite predominant with women experiencing or going through a pregnancy. When it comes to perimenopause and menopause, whoop, you know, the hormones are starting to drop, causing digestive discomfort. So all of a sudden they've had a, you know, okay-ish gut, and then they start experiencing bloating and irregular bowel movements. The other thing that we're actually seeing is how these hormonal fluctuations, for example, perimenopause and menopause and even postmenopause, can impact the diversity or the profile of your gut microbiome too. So again, I know I can keep talking, but these are just examples of how these kind of like hormonal shifts at different life stages can significantly influence your gut health, contributing to symptoms, but also looking at the profile of your gut microbiome too.
Wow, the connections are definitely there, right? And it really
Clear
sounds like a roller,
cut.
yeah. And it's clearly a roller coaster, isn't it? And for every woman is also very different. And as you
Exactly.
said in the very beginning, we are massively under research. More and more now, we are seeing a lot of focus on women's health from a research perspective, which is definitely needed. So, well, good times ahead, I would say, for us. And definitely we're now going to talk a little bit more about strategies and what are the practical tips that we can follow for that. But actually, Sandra, there's something I wanted to ask you, which absolutely struck me when I read it on your book, which is that our microbiome I mean, how clever, right? These, little guardians, as you define them, that they are, that during menopause, they have even the ability to generate more estrogen if obviously we fuel them the right way.
No.
But could you tell us a little bit more about this mechanism? It's just fascinating.
So look, it's again, I mean, I just covered these examples of the menstrual cycle and so on. This just gives you that example of how hormones impact our gut. Now, if you want to reverse that connection and look at whole gut, how does gut influence our hormones? There are a few examples that we can use to kind of elaborate when it comes to that connection. One is looking at something called the estrobolome. I know it's a mouthful, like your estrobolome, what? And also there's still a lot of controversy around it. Like, does it exist? Do we know enough about it? But when it comes to the estrobolome, it's basically it just refers to this collection of gut microbes that are capable of regulating the metabolism of estrogen. So this estrobolome, let's call it that, so that's group of microbes, they have the ability to influence a delicate balance between estrogen and its metabolites, so what it's broken down to. What we're seeing is, okay, if there's an imbalance in the levels of estrogen, it can be linked to an impaired or kind of a glitchy estrobolome, and vice versa. Also, what we do know is, now this is kind of going maybe in a bit too much detail, but the estrobolome produces an enzyme called, you don't need to know actually what the enzyme is called, but it kind of produces these compounds that can break down and help the reabsorption of estrogen and convert it into inactive estrogen. So again, we're only fine. I know you're smiling, because it is a minefield, because we're only learning about this recently, and we don't know, conclusive mechanisms of how these are working. We're just looking at it recently. I would say it's only in the last maybe 10 years that we're starting to I would say about 10 years. There's not a lot specifically looking at the estrobolome. I'm looking at this gut hormone connection. I'm doing a lot of research now for potentially, book 2 or project 2. But I think the other example that I use apart from the estrobolome to look at this connection is when you're looking at inflammation and immune response. So we do know, the health of your gut lining is crucial for preventing inflammation and maintaining a balanced immune response. If someone has chronic inflammation in the gut, that can lead to systemic inflammation. So it's like a cascade of events, basically, which can affect sex hormone levels and lead to, let's call them, hormonal imbalances too. Because you do see that, I mean, a lot of the times you see, again, this is potentially purely anecdotal at this point in time until I, finish my research, but for some of my clients with inflammatory bowel disease, IBD, that can actually tie into potentially certain infertility issues as well. We see an overlap between endometriosis and other gut conditions too. So again, yes, we have these clear-cut associations going both ways. So again, this bi-directional pathway between your gut and your hormones.
Wow, this is fascinating and complex at the same time. But I'm glad to hear, Sandra, that, you, and I'm sure in the ecosystem, more professionals are researching on the space. And I can't wait, if you have book 2, project 2, please
watch this
know.
space. I was going to say, we're the idea is there. Let's just see. I don't know if I'm digging myself a hole, because there's not a lot out there. So I don't know how I'm going to write book 2 if I really want to focus in this area.
Well, I'm sure you can do this, actually. So that's super
Fingers
exciting.
Crossed.
Yes, I have no doubt you will make it. But, now moving to another point, which is you speak about 4 key pillars, right, of gut health. And I also love that holistic approach, right? There's not only about nutrition, but you mentioned earlier, right? We have the connection with the mind. Then obviously that also touches movement and sleep. And could you give us an overview of what are the 4 pillars of gut health?
So I call them, not just for gut health, but you can consider them the 4 pillars of well-being, but obviously I use them as the 4 pillars of gut health. So when it comes to these 4 pillars, we know that nutrition alone is not going to do the trick when it comes to working towards a blissful gut. So we feel our best when these 4 pillars are in sync. we've got nutrition, we've got mind, we've got movement, and we've got sleep. So one way, actually, I would say even to listeners, if you do want to set any sort of gut health goals or wellness goals, you can use these 4 pillars or look at them as your foundational goals, right? And you just kind of pick one goal under every pillar for the next 3 months to work on. So it kind of sets you a nice template that you're not just focusing on nutrition, but you have like a nice overview that feeds into all these other pillars because it's all interconnected, and we see that. So when it comes to, if we want to quickly go through these pillars, maybe just kind of like a brief snapshot of each. When it comes to nutrition, look, we do know that what we eat profoundly impacts our gut, whether you're male or female, right? So I was going to say it doesn't have to be female specific, but it is crucial to focus on a diversity of fibers. This is one thing that we know. So diversity is key here. But also when it comes to fiber, you need to find the right amount that works for you. Yes, we've got the general guidelines out there, but for some people, these general guidelines might cause a lot of gut turbulences. If we had to look at other, important nutrients, keep it colorful. We've got polyphenols, we've got the prebiotics and probiotics, obviously a food first policy. So this is where I always say, keep it as colorful and diverse as possible, predominantly plants, but it doesn't mean you have to make the switch to veganism, because we do know that you can still consume things like salmon, fish, mackerel, sardines, and have healthy fats in your diet. Even just in, having some animal sources there are absolutely fine in balance and moderation. Now, if you had to look at it from a woman's perspective, we do know that at different life stages, whether we're going through pregnancy or through menopause, we have different nutrient needs. So you also need to tailor your needs to depending on where what stage of life you're in. And if we had to look at it from a gut perspective, we need to address the symptoms as well. So this is where I would say, nutrition is at the core of what we do as dietitians. Next one is the mind. I feel like a lot of the time it's the most, I'm not going to say underrated, but people dismiss that pillar and don't realize how much of an impact it has. And a lot of the times, especially when working with clients, for example, with irritable bowel syndrome or IBS, and this is where there's a glitch between how your brain and your gut are communicating. If you've ticked off nutrition, if you've ticked off movement, but if you haven't addressed the mind, you're still going to have a turbulent gut. For me personally, the mind was a missing, piece of my own gut puzzle. If we, again, do I want to tie it, bring in from a woman's health perspective? Yes, if we are more prone to stress and anxiety, let's say, and other mental health struggles, my advice there is, and I think I also mentioned that in the book, we're never going to get the stress out of our lives. Right? It's how we cope with it. We need to build up that toolbox or these tools to help us cope, and that we're not so reactive, or, our guts become a little bit more resilient, regardless of what life is going to throw at us. So there's a ton of different examples of things that you can do personally for as an IBS sufferer and someone who has anxiety. I mean, I'm in therapy. I've got certain practices that I need to do daily, to keep everything in balance. And even, I've had 2 burnouts. So it's, I go into the cyclical burnout. I admit that, and I'm learning, but your gut won't be blissful if you do not address that pillar. Movement, we all know how important regular movement is to, maintain healthy digestion and keep your bowel movements regular. But from a woman's perspective too, I think the type of movement is important. Do you remember, again, I mean, I'm not going to ask your age basically, but back in the day, we were bombarded by like cardio for women, cardio for weight loss, cardio. And actually, we know that strength training, it should be a cornerstone when it comes to our movement goals. We need to work towards, aesthetics aside, when it comes to strength training or light resistance training, I always ask my clients, like, train for the next 10 to 20 years. How do you want to move in your 60s and 70s? Train for, being able to try to lift your shopping bags going up the stairs without the risk of fractures. You know what I mean? So this is where movement plays a huge role, not just for gut health, but overall well-being and protecting us from things like fractures and injuries. And then finally, sleep. I think this is one thing that's also quite underrated. We do know, I mean, your gut microbiome has its circadian rhythm. You know, our bodies do enjoy and thrive when it comes to routines of going to bed at the same time, waking up at the same time. Yes, it's not always possible, but again, if we had to tie it up to a woman's perspective, females do experience sleep disturbances because of hormonal changes. And you also do notice that for women who experience perimenopause and, you know, approaching the menopause too. So I think, you know, poor sleep can also exacerbate gut issues, and you just end up getting stuck in this cycle. So whenever you're thinking about your gut health, think about these 4 pillars and try to pick one thing that you can do to kind of work your way towards that, and make sure it's sustainable and works with your reality.
Such a comprehensive overview, Sandra. It's amazing. And as you said, some of these pillars are completely underrated. I mean, especially picking up on the mind. I don't know if you're ever asked this, but I actually have been asked multiple times, like as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, a founder with a chronic gut condition, how do you handle it? And to be honest, I had very, very stressful periods. And as you said, stress doesn't go away, right? It's part of
Yes.
our lifestyle. And I choose that actually, but it's about coping with it, handling it, and
Exactly.
definitely having techniques and strategies. And actually, well, very sadly, because this is such a masterclass and we could spend hours on this, we have to do part two one day when book two is out. But anyway, I wanted to ask you, and this is something I ask all my guests all the time, which is what do you do on a daily basis to take care of your gut health? And actually, it would be great if you can tie up and connect some of the pillars with strategies that you do on a daily
Yep.
basis.
Okay, so if I had, again, this is, you know, trying to keep it simple. If we had to look at nutrition, one thing that I personally do is I always make sure that I got three is my lucky number. So 3 different types of vegetables at lunch and dinner. So sometimes I even rely on frozen veg. They're absolutely great for times where you do not have enough time to kind of whip up a meal. So don't fear frozen vegetables, because you can easily get 5 to 6 different types of veg. So that's one easy tip that I do there from a nutrition perspective. I always make sure I've got the number 3 there. Now, for the movement pillar, daily, I would say 15 minutes of movement daily. I have a very busy schedule. If I have scheduled exercise, I would say it's probably just once or twice a week. And this is where I do my strength training. But what I really try to do is some form of 15-minute, it can be a quick resistance band, you know, strength training video. I've got a stationary bike spinning 15 minutes. So again, small little things that are actionable and absolutely doable. Especially if time is, you know, time is an excuse that we all use. In terms of sleep, I think for me, sleep is a very big pillar that impacts my anxiety and my gut as well. So I actually go to bed quite early. I need my sleep, and having 2 kids, my quality of sleep is obviously, you know, gone out the window. However, this is why I do get to bed early, because I always make sure that if I'm going to get woken up at some point during the night, I want to at least have had 5 to 6 hours of straight sleep. And then potentially I'm woken up in the middle of the night. So I do go to bed early. Unfortunately, summertime has shifted that. Everyone's going to bed much later, even the kids. And then for the mind, it's belly breathing for me. You know, call it meditation, call it what you want. But I think for me, breathing through your belly is something that we've lost. You know, we are belly breathers as babies, so we lose that as adults. And when you're quite stressed out, you become shallow breath. You know, we're shallow breathers. So for me, belly breathing or diaphragmatic breathing truly helps to tap into that parasympathetic nervous system, or that rest and digest part of your nervous system. So these are things that I, you know, try and be consistent with, given how busy life is. But this is, again, an example, you know, pick one thing that you can do under that pillar that fits within your reality.
Wow, very powerful tips. I love how actionable they are and how down to earth, right? In terms of,
Thank you. You can
yeah,
hold me accountable now that I've actually put them out there. People need to check in that, are you actually doing that?
I will. I love the fact that, you mentioned the 3 as the lucky number in terms of veggies, and given, the capacity, the time we have and all the resources, but definitely belly breathing, diaphragmatic breathing. I'm so glad you raised this. On season 1 of this podcast, I had basically an episode with an exceptional guest around this. So anyway, super nice to see all these connecting points. Sandra, thank you so much. It's incredible to have you on the podcast.
My absolute pleasure.
Just very lastly, how can our listeners find you and follow you?
So definitely on Instagram. I do have a love-hate relationship with social media. I don't know about you, but we are on Instagram and also LinkedIn. So it's Nutrition A to Z by Sandra Mikhail. It is a mouthful, so I hope you just add that in the show notes. It's just much easier for people to go there. So yeah, both Instagram and LinkedIn. I'm very responsive on LinkedIn, so feel free to, connect and chat.
Amazing. We will add basically all the handles and links. Definitely worth following your journey, Sandra. I'm so grateful that we crossed paths, I have to say.
Likewise.
You're truly inspiring. I can't wait to see more about the work you're doing. Obviously, you do a lot of clinic work, but the research work coming up. And definitely let's keep in touch. As you said, as key takeaways, I'm fascinated by the gut hormone-gut connection and all the work that these little guardians do with very actionable, easy tips, very powerful, holistic tips to manage our gut health and overall health. So massive thanks, Sandra.
Thank you so much for having me.
I will see you soon then. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.